Hi everyone. So happy to be here. Very excited about this inaugural event and looking forward to watching its progress year over year. I think when I was first told about it, it's very exciting to see an event like this here in Bern, but in a bigger context in Switzerland. I think there's never been a more important time for people to get together and talk about this topic. So I want to spend a little while talking with you about how security has changed just over the last few years. And I think one of the important changes is security is becoming a lot more personal than it was in the past. I think a lot of the attacks that we saw in the past were very generic. Right? They'll go after my mom the same way they go after some employee inside of a company. But today, the tooling is in place to personalize attacks, so much so that the marginal cost to an attacker of personalizing one more attack is starting to approach $0. And I think some things in security break when that starts to happen. So I just want to spend a little while talking about that, and I'll share some data with you on that topic too. But before we get started, just to put things in context, I want to share a personal security story with you. And this happened to me about 2 years ago now, and it was on a long flight. I travel a lot. I think last year I flew something like 400,000 miles, so I got very comfortable on a plane, and I have a routine. I get my iPad, I load it up with episodes of this show called The Big Bang Theory. Has anybody ever seen that? Just out of curiosity. If you haven't seen it, you have to see it. This is just an amazing show, especially in our industry. But so I load up with a series of these episodes. They're on the iPad. I'm sitting on the plane. The plane takes off, and we're maybe 10 minutes into the flight. And then I suddenly hear screaming from the left-hand side of the plane, right, which is very unsettling. And so I look around, and this object flies past the left side of my head, hits this lady in the back of her head, drops to the ground, and takes back off. Right? And people are completely panicked. Nobody knows what's going on. And then finally the captain comes on, over the loudspeaker and says, "Folks, I hope you're having a good flight. You may have noticed, but we have an extra passenger on the flight today. There is a small bird trapped in the cabin." Right? But don't panic. It's nothing to worry about. We have a zoologist on staff, which in retrospect was very concerning, but that was the case. And we've been in contact with him on the ground, and he's working on a plan. Right? We'll get back to you soon. Click. Right? Meanwhile, the bird is terrorizing the plane. And unfortunately, it appears that the bird also had a full meal before the flight. Made it slightly more unpleasant. But, it's interesting in those kinds of panic situations, you start to get the wisdom of the crowd, right? Everybody's got a good idea on what to do about the bird. And so this guy yells out, "We should get the air marshal to shoot it." That was actually very popular for a little while, and then I got away. And then the next suggestion was roll down a window and it'll fly out. I probably shouldn't listen to that guy anymore. And so then finally, the captain comes back. He's like, "Look, we've talked to zoologists, and here's the plan." So the plan was everyone was supposed to close their window shades so it'd be dark in the cabin. And then they would open up the bathroom doors, the lavatory doors, and the light would be on in the lavatory. The bird, in theory, would be attracted to the light, fly into the bathroom, and then it would close and trap this thing in the bathroom, right? Nobody had a good alternate plan, so of course we immediately did it. And it actually worked. Like 5 minutes later, bird flies into the bathroom in business class. That's when it really hits home, right? It really hurts. But it flies drive in there, tape that thing up, and we continue on to London from San Francisco. So it's a pretty long flight, like 11 hours. So when we land, I'm pretty traumatized by this whole bird incident. I'm sure many of you fly a lot too. I don't know if this ever happened to you. It never happened to me. And so as soon as we land, I call my wife on the phone. It's like middle of the night, right? Wake her up. Like, look, you're not going to believe this. And I tell her about the bird. I tell her about the air marshal. Give her all the facts of the story. And her first reaction, without even thinking about it, was, is the bird okay? Did the bird survive? Right? And I said, well, I really don't know. At a minimum, it's very unhappy. I don't know if it made it. And so about 2 hours later, I had a meeting with a colleague of mine, a security professional, has been in the business for a long time, and still traumatized from this bird thing. I tell him the same story, the same details I told my wife, the same cadence with which I told her. And his immediate first reaction, without even thinking about it, was, that's very interesting. I bet I could build a small mechanical bird with an explosive charge, have it fly into the plane while they're loading food, and if they couldn't detect a wild animal, how would they ever detect my mechanical bird that's trying to hide itself? I looked at the guy and I'm like, well, first, that's very disturbing that that's what you would think. But that's exactly what I thought too. That's the first thing I thought when I saw that bird. And it's very interesting. I've told this story to probably 100 people by now. And their minds always go to one of those two places. It's either the safety of the bird, or what are the wildlife import policies of the UK, or something, that kind of stuff. Or they recognize it for what it is, that a vulnerability has been exposed in airplane security. And it's very interesting. Same set of facts, two very different perspectives. And I think in a way that's what defines us as security professionals. But it raises the question, how much differently must those two groups of people look at something like this? When my wife looks at this, what she thinks about, her simple algorithm is, what do I need to click to make it go away? Right? That's all she thinks about when something like this appears. For those of us in security, we probably have a more complex algorithm. We've seen bad things happen after stuff like this. And so we start to ask questions like, which website were we trying to visit? What's the DNS resolution process that we're using? What network are we on? Has the certificate authority been hacked recently? It's sad you have to ask those questions now. But it is a much more complex algorithm. And it's very interesting because you can watch someone who is tuned towards security, someone that would be concerned about that bird and the future of airline security, pause longer on something like this than my wife would or my mom would. And I think it tells a tale that we've known about insecurity for a very long time. We always say it, and it's like a conversation ender at the end of the night in a security discussion. Well, at the end of the day, it's always about the users, right? And then nobody really has anything to say. As a follow-up to that, and say, okay, good night, we'll see you next time. But what we're starting to uncover, I think, in the security space is that we need to take into account the personality, the susceptibility, the riskiness of the user if we're going to make traction in the security space. So I just want to talk about this personalization and how attacks have really changed over the past 10 years or so. So to look back, I guess it was 15 years ago, or maybe 14 years ago, I was in grad school, I was working on my PhD, and in the summers, I went and did internships over at Microsoft in Redmond, Washington. And, I was in a research group, pretty hardy group of guys, right? Not really, but we worked a lot. And it was my first, I think it was my first week there. And I didn't know a lot of people. These are like research folks, so not the most social people in the world. So I'm sitting at my machine, and I get this note, this very nice, very kind of friendly note from one of my coworkers. I'm like, wow, maybe I misjudged these guys. And then I get another one from another coworker. I'm like, wow, this is actually an amazing place. When you get past the hard surface of these people, there's a lot of care and love in that community. And so I started to get many of these love letters over the next few minutes and hours. Right? And it's interesting when you look back at the I love you virus today, with today's technology. It doesn't look that bad, actually, right? With today's technology, well-known, signature, it's a VB script, it's an email attachment. We got a lot of tools that could deal with stuff like that. And it was very generic. It doesn't say, I love you, Hugh, and remember that time when we went to Hawaii and all of that stuff. It doesn't say anything like that. It's incredibly generic, and there's no incremental effort that was made in sending it to me. The same is true of scams. I'm sure you can't read this, but I'm sure you've received literally hundreds of these over the last 15 years. This is a classic Nigerian prince scam, right? Hey, look, I happened upon several $100 million. If you help me get out of the country, I'll give you a couple million of it. That kind of scam. And you do it 2-3 times, and then you realize, wow, this is a scam, and I probably shouldn't do it again. But it's interesting, right? If you look at this under today's lens of where people are, even normal users like my mom, they realize something is probably wrong with this, even though, again, it's very generic. Not a lot of time was spent customizing it to the user. You fast forward to today, and you look at what's being called in the media and by security companies and others, these advanced persistent threats, right? And then you actually look under the covers of what an advanced persistent threat is. Like if you look at the forensics on one of these things, a lot of times the technical aspects of it aren't incredibly advanced, but the place that it is advanced is socially. So the people that they're trying to attack, the company that they're trying to attack, there's been some group that's gone on to social networking sites like LinkedIn and Twitter and Facebook, figured out who all the system administrators are in the company, figured out what they love to eat for lunch, what their favorite football team is, where they went on vacation last week. They profile these individuals, and then they not only send them very tailored, very credible emails, they call them on the phone. And so many of these attacks, these APTs, start off as human vector attacks. They start off with a phone call, they start off with an email, and increasingly those things are very personal. And it's harder than ever, even for a paranoid person, even somebody who would be very concerned about that bird on the plane, to make good security choices. Think about the signaling that we have today around security. So my mom, I always use her as a litmus test for where the security kind of awareness is in the community. But we lived in New York, and my wife and I did. I taught at Columbia University for many years, and my mom would come and visit us. So I'm originally from the Bahamas, she's from the Bahamas, so she comes to visit, and we always knew if we were going to walk into a bad neighborhood.
Right? We'd just know. Wouldn't have to tell each other, hey, look, this looks like a pretty sketchy neighborhood, because we knew the signals of a bad neighborhood. Right? There was graffiti on the walls, everything had bars, there were bullet holes on the side of the building, there might be a trash can on fire, right? You immediately knew you were in a bad place and you should probably get out of this place. There were signals that we'd learned from children growing all the way up, and it was a shared experience. If I go online with Mom, our signaling around dangerous places is very different. I go to a website that's selling some latest PlayStation version for a very cheap price, and it's got 3 pop-up windows, it's got .ru at the end of it, there's like all of these things that to me look like graffiti and bullet holes and bars and trash cans. And to Mom, she's like, I can get this thing $10 cheaper here. And she just buys it from there. It looks the same as Amazon.com does to her. So the signaling in the physical world that most of us are familiar with is being removed in the cyber world. And to be honest, it's being removed even for security professionals. Think about a link that you get today on something like Twitter. All the signaling has been taken out of where that link is going to take you, because it looks like bit.ly/ and a bunch of letters and numbers, and you don't know where that thing's going. You could click on it and it could go to Wikipedia. You could click on it and it could go to the most malware infested site you've ever been to in your entire life. So even for security professionals, it's becoming harder and harder to deal with that kind of signaling. So I think what's happened in the space is that there has become an urgent need for technologies that help people make good choices, but also don't interfere in any way with their experience. And I'll talk about what I mean on that in just a sec. But first, just to give you an idea of how things are changing, I wanted to share with you an experiment that I ran with some of my students at Columbia about 3 years ago. And, one of the things that we wanted to figure out is, could you, just through search engine optimization, change the meaning of a word? Or could you, just through search optimization, change what Google would tell you about something? So we picked this term that didn't exist called context reflux, right? It sounds like it's important, but it doesn't mean anything. And we defined it to be the cost of context switching, right? So the cost of moving from one activity to the other, the time it takes you to do that, either in cost or money. And I asked my students to seed this definition onto the internet, right, whatever that means. And so they interpreted it very broadly. Some of them created a Wikipedia page instantly. Others put it in as blog post comments. It's an odd comment to put a definition of a term, but they did that. One of them, you can see at the very bottom, created a YouTube video, which was incredibly boring. I only had one slide on it with definition. But the interesting thing, though, was that within 2 hours, we owned Google search. So if you typed in context reflux, this is what you saw back then. If you type it in right now, you see this stuff, but you also see stuff that talks about what I'm going to talk to you about next, which is an experiment that we then ran based on this. So I'm the program committee chair for RSA conference, and I do the closing keynote every year at our US conference. So I don't know if anybody here has ever played a game called Boulder Dash, or ever even heard of it. But it's a semi-popular game in the US, and basically how it works is you pick an obscure term, usually from engineering or medicine, that people really don't know what it is, and someone has the legitimate definition of this term, and they tell it to a group. And then someone else has a fake definition of this term that sounds like it could be real. And then you have to pick who has the real definition and who has the fake one, right? So we played this during the keynote at that conference. So we had, I don't know, maybe 15,000 people in the audience, and we asked them to guess. So the term, of course, was context reflux. I gave my definition, which is the one we seeded, and then I had a buddy of mine who is a TV journalist, who's very convincing sounding, and he gave his definition that has something to do with gastrointestinal problems, which also sounded, because of the reflux word, sounded like it was possible. But so the two of us gave it, and we asked people to vote, and immediately everybody in the audience started to cheat, right? They brought out their smartphone, typed it in, and this is what they saw. And so those folks were almost 100% convinced that my definition was the right one, right? Because this is what Google told them. This is what Google told them the truth was. I bring this up because there is a mismatch between reality and the perception of reality when it comes to trustworthiness, especially in searches. And attackers are using techniques like this now. It's very different from the I love you days. I got an email a couple of months ago that says, well, as you know, links in emails are very dangerous. So I am not including a link in this email. I'm like, oh, okay, that's good. Instead, here's the name of our company. Please search for us online, and then you can download a trial version of our product from our site. You can never be too safe, right? That's the way that they handle this. And of course, it was an attack. Right? And they'd taken the name of their company, they search engine optimized it all the way up, so that when you typed it in, you bounced trust essentially off of Google. Now again, I bring that up to say it's harder than ever for people to make good choices, even people who are paranoid like those of us that are in the security space. Oh, and I just bring this up very quickly. We also owned Google Suggest. So if you typed in context space R, reflux was the first thing that came up. I'm sorry to say we've now lost that. It's something else. I don't know. I think context Rome is now taken over or something, which is sad. So I want to give you an example of if we do work towards these technologies that are assistive of the user, but yet not encumbering on the user, it can lead us to a very different place. You know, if security is done right, if you think about the areas where security is actually done correctly in the world, it's transformative, and it isn't oppressive. This is an image of Times Square in New York City 40 years ago. 40 years ago, Times Square was an incredibly dangerous place. If you had young kids, you wouldn't even consider taking them to Times Square after dark. It was a haven of prostitution, drugs, crime, incredibly, incredibly dangerous. There was a lot of commerce going on back then, but it was all cash, as you can probably tell by some of the titles. Contrast that with what Times Square is today. It's the iconic image of New York, right? It's the place that you have to go and visit if you go to New York. And it's completely packed at 2 o'clock in the afternoon or 2 o'clock in the morning. Some of the most trusted brands in the world pay a fortune just to have their name associated with the feeling of Times Square. So how did Times Square move from what it was to what it is? Actually, if you look into it, it's security that got it from that place where it was to where it is. Top policies on crime. If you see something, say something, right? Famous New York slogan. Very, very visible police presence, right? A lot of cops on every corner. Video cameras, closed circuit cameras capturing what was happening there. But if you walk around Times Square right now, you don't see any of that stuff. You don't feel the security. You just try and dodge people who are trying to give you free comedy tickets or sell you a piece of electronics. You feel safe and you focus on the experience instead of focusing on the safety. But how do you think this transition from what it was to what it is, how does that relate to IT? Well, there's one more analogy that I want to share with you before I get to the technology implementation. And this I think, to my own view, is the most powerful personal image of, kind of when I get up every day, what I hope to do in this space, and what I really think that we all can do in the security space. And it's my favorite sport in the Olympics. It's the uneven bars in gymnastics. And anybody ever watch this, just out of curiosity? Dude, this is an amazing sport. Unbelievable sport. And when you watch one of these performances, it's not that I am myself a gymnast, but I can appreciate the athleticism involved in this particular event. But when you watch this sport, you're completely focused on the gymnast. Right? That's the only thing you see, and the incredible stuff that she can do, pushing the bounds of human capability. But there's always somebody else in that photo. This guy, the spotter that's standing beneath her. It's the spotter and the gymnast that actually work together that make that routine possible. And the spotter actually has a very personal relationship with the gymnast. He knows that gymnast well. He's seen her do that routine 1,000 times. He knows when she's about to do something really risky, and you see him come in close, ready to catch her, just like he is in this photo. But he also knows when she's in her comfort zone, when she's in a place where she's never fallen in her entire career, and you see him step back and let her shine and let the camera snap. He's so effective at doing what he does because he has a long history, a long tail of data to support his decisions and how he protects her. But he also has up-to-the-minute context. He knows how she did this morning at practice. He knows what she had for breakfast. He knows if she got a disturbing text message at the beginning of the day. And he factors all of that into how he protects her. But he's also incredibly good at being invisible. He doesn't interfere with what she does. He's only additive. And because he's there, he gives her the confidence to do the third flip or the second release. If he wasn't there, she'd never be able to achieve what she's able to achieve. Now, the interesting thing about that, to me at least, is that this is where security is moving, to become the spotter in the enterprise. The interesting thing about the spotter is the spotter cannot go to the gymnast and say, you cannot do this third release. His job is just to adapt to what she actually does. And that's how the profession of IT security is changing in businesses. I think we did have veto power. If you went back a couple of years ago, some of us may still have it, where security could stop a project or stop a process. You use the hammer of compliance or maybe some other one around risk. Today, though, what's happening more and more are people have choices with technology outside of the IT infrastructure, which are terrific. Things like Dropbox, for example. That thing is awesome. If you compare the ease of use of something like Dropbox versus whatever in-house IT-approved document sharing thing you probably have, I can almost guarantee you Dropbox is super easy and easier to use, and people would prefer to use it. Right? The same is true in a whole bunch of areas of IT productivity. And 5 years ago, we had the ability to take, for example, the collaboration software that people were using, and we could make somebody authenticate 3 times and give a blood sample to get into that thing if we wanted, right? They didn't really have a choice. It's like, dude, if you want to get this document, this is what you got to do. Today, though, what's happening in many businesses is that people and even groups are micro-standardizing. They're getting around a table in an office somewhere and say, look, let's be honest here. You've got a Dropbox account, you've got a Dropbox account, I've got a Dropbox account. We're just going to use Dropbox from now on. Everybody cool with that? Everybody good? Everybody's good. And they don't ask anyone in IT. This is happening. It's not a choice, I think, in most businesses. And so the question then becomes, how do we put a spotter in place in the business that allows the business to do this stuff and be productive, and people have the great experience with technology at work that they already do at home? How do we do this and put a spotter in place that protects the business in a non-invasive, non-intrusive way? This has never been more important in IT because of 2 very critical transformations that are happening. The bottom one I've already talked about, the empowerment of users with free technology online. It's incredible. I can promise you, anything you have an internal IT solution for, you can find a freeware solution, a service, an app that can do a pretty good job at approximating it or do it better from a user experience perspective. The thing at the top is also very interesting, and the businesses are pushing for increased customer intimacy. There's a huge move towards self-service in banking, for example. I haven't gone into a bank branch in probably 6 months. But everything I ever wanted to do at my bank, I can do with my phone, whenever I want to do it. If I want to do it at 2 a.m., if that's the most convenient time for me, I do it at 2 a.m. That same transformation towards self-service is happening in healthcare too. I have a rash, broke out on my hand, take a picture of the rash, goes off to the specialist, either says, go to the hospital immediately, or you're probably going to be okay. That transformation is happening in medicine. It's disrupting a series of industries. And again, security has a very critical role to play, but a non-intrusive role. And I want to introduce you to our biggest enemy, I think, in security, and it is the inaccurate perception of risk. I think a lot of things we hear about when we're security professionals, it just sounds really risky, but we don't know how risky it actually is. And with that in mind, and I know it's still right at the tail end of vacation season, if any of you are going to any tropical destinations, I've got to warn you about Sharkmageddon. There has been a rapid rise in worldwide shark attacks, and I just thought this would be a good forum to, just on a person-to-person basis, and I'll let you know about that. These are the headlines that came out about 2 years ago after a study was done on worldwide shark attacks. This is one from MSNBC.com, a news outlet in the U.S. Shark attacks rose 25% last year across the globe. And note the incredibly scary picture of a shark to emphasize the imminent danger. This one was from the Los Angeles Times. U.S. led the world in shark attacks last year. Sharks a little friendlier looking, but still makes the point still pretty serious. This is another news outlet that essentially shows people posting posters, signs, closing beaches because they're so worried about this 25% increase in something. Right? 25%? That's pretty serious, right? 25%, that's really alarming, right? And if you actually go back, though, and look at the numbers on how much shark attacks increased, they went from 63 attacks worldwide for every single person who went into the ocean over the year to 79. While that is statistically, my PhD's in math, so I can attest to this, while this is numerically like a 25% increase or so, your personal chances of being bitten by a shark are less than you being hit by a bus painted like a shark on the way to the beach, right? That's actually true. There is what's skewed is there's a bus company that has a shark on it. Which actually made it true. But it's very, it's very interesting. And that same level of risk was true before the 25% increase and after the 25% increase. But we live in an industry where it is very difficult for someone to take even a news story and come out the other side of it understanding what the actual real risk is to them or what the real risk is to the business. So I want to leave you with two last images. I know I've got 4 minutes left. But this one is, another, I guess, aspirational one. So I mentioned I travel a lot. And it's interesting, I can go to one of the most concerning countries and walk into one of the most concerning stores and buy a bottle of Evian water from one of the most concerning people I've ever bought it from. And if he hands me that bottle, and as soon as I get it, I turn the top of it and I hear the click of that safety seal underneath it, I suddenly don't think anymore about how concerning this place is, how concerning this guy is that just handed me this bottle of water. All the history of who gave it to him and who gave it to him before that and how is it transported, I don't think about it anymore. And I only think about that safety seal in those contexts. Otherwise, it never interferes with my experience in drinking that bottle of water. I think that's where security needs to move to as a profession. And I think there's a couple of key competencies that businesses need to build up to make that happen. I think we need competencies around user experience, around performance, around the ability to resolve problems. And if there's a last kind of thought I'll leave you with on this, is that security is moving from a pure prevention mode, which is a mode we were in for a long time, into a mode where we accept and embrace that some level of failure will occur. And we engineer safety nets into the enterprise to be able to recover from that failure. It could look like forensics, it could look like instrumentation, but it's a very important sea change that's happened in this space, which is a sign of maturity, I think. So the last image, I promise this is the last one, I know my red card's going to come out, but I just wanted to leave you with this as a thought to how to enter the rest of this day and the rest of these next 2 days at the summit. So when I learned how to drive, and I mentioned I'm from the Bahamas, right, so we're third world, but I think everybody learned the same way, is that you hold the steering wheel in the 10-2 position. This is the way that everyone was taught around the world because it was statistically calculated to be the optimal hold of the wheel that gave you maximum agility. So if a cat came in the middle of the street, this is the position that would let you get out of the way of the cat without having to go hand over hand, which is incredibly dangerous. This is what everyone was taught, and it was absolutely the correct answer 20 years ago. Today, that is one of the most dangerous ways to hold the steering wheel. Never hold the steering wheel that way. The right way to hold the steering wheel today is in the 9-3 position. What changed? This is the popularization of airbags. Right? If you hold the wheel in the 10-2 position in a low-impact crash, the airbag's going to deploy and it's going to burn an arm, break an arm, or you'll punch yourself in the face, right? None of those things are good outcomes. But if you hold it in the 9-3 position, it's a compromise between the agility that you still get and the ability of this control, this airbag, to function properly. Try to convince my mom that that one at the top, though, is wrong. I'll give you her number. You can call her and try. It's not a very easy thing to do. Once we're taught something that was true at some point, it's very difficult to get someone to reset their expectations. But I would encourage you, as you go into the rest of today, and when we had the 5th anniversary of this event, that you think about and always hold in the back of your mind what precedents were set in security in a very different time, in a time when we didn't have activists, in a time when everything was generic and not personalized. What were the precedents set back then? How did we do architecture? And should we be rethinking those precedents today, given what's changed in the threat environment? Thank you so much for the opportunity to be able to be here and speak with you. I really appreciate it. It looks like an amazing agenda, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.